There's a certain kind of person who walks into a room and immediately reads it. Not loudly, not obviously. They don't announce what they notice. They simply register it. The slight tension in someone's shoulders, the pause before a carefully chosen word, the smile that arrives a half second too late. They track these signals the way a compass tracks north, automatically, without effort, without permission. To those around them, they appear quiet, perhaps even passive. But inside, something is always running. Something is always watching, calculating, interpreting. They are not trying to do this, they simply cannot stop. This is the person we are here to talk about. Not the one who is unusually intelligent in the conventional sense, not the one who speaks first or speaks most, but the one who, when the meeting ends and everyone files out, already knows who is uncomfortable, who is performing confidence they didn't feel, and who left with something unsaid sitting heavy behind their eyes. They know because they were never not watching. And for a long time, perhaps for most of their life, they have carried this as a private burden. They may have been told they are too sensitive, too serious, that they overthink things, that they need to relax, let things go, stop reading into everything. What no one told them, what many of them have never been told at all, is that what they experience has a name, that it is not a flaw, that it is, in fact, one of the most complex and demanding psychological orientations a human being can have. And that understanding it is the first step toward no longer being consumed by it. There are two primary pathways that create what psychologists sometimes call hyperawareness, a chronic state of heightened perceptual and emotional sensitivity. The first is adaptive. It develops. It is learned. When a person grows up in an environment where unpredictability is the norm, where a parent's mood shifts without warning, where conflict erupts suddenly and without pattern, where love is conditional and approval is uncertain, the nervous system adapts. It learns to scan. It learns to anticipate. It develops a kind of internal early warning system, finely tuned to detect the earliest signs of danger, tension, or withdrawal. What the child learns is this: if I can see it coming, I can prepare. If I can read the room before the room reads me, I am safe. This is not a failure of the child. This is intelligence applied to survival. The tragedy is that this system, so useful in the context where it was built, doesn't know how to stand down once that context changes. It keeps scanning long after the original threat has passed. The second pathway is not learned, but innate. Some individuals are born with what researchers call high sensory processing sensitivity, a neurological predisposition to process stimuli more deeply, to register subtleties more acutely, and to be more profoundly affected by emotional and environmental information. Elaine Aron, the psychologist who identified this trait, estimated that approximately 15 to 20% of the population has some degree of this sensitivity. It appears across species, suggesting it may be an evolutionary strategy. Whether through adaptation or through nature, and often through both, the result is the same. A person whose mind is fundamentally oriented toward depth of perception, toward reading beneath the surface, toward registering what is felt but not said, what is meant but not expressed. Sign 1, the mind that never stops scanning. Imagine your attention as a radar dish, rotating continuously, sweeping the environment in every direction, registering data points that most people's attention simply filters out. In a conversation, you are not only tracking the content of what is being said, you are tracking tone, pace. Did they speed up there or slow down? The space between sentences, what the other person is doing with their hands, their eyes, their body. You are running multiple threads simultaneously, and each thread is producing data that feeds back into your interpretation of the moment. This is not a conscious choice. It is not something that can be switched off by deciding to pay less attention. The result is a state of near constant low-level analysis that runs in the background of every social interaction, every new environment, every relationship. And while this analysis often produces remarkable insight, a depth of understanding that others genuinely envy, it also produces something else. It produces fatigue, because radar that never turns off eventually exhausts the system running it. Sign 2, emotional overinterpretation. Someone doesn't respond to a text for several hours, and the hyperaware mind doesn't simply note the absence. It begins to construct meaning. Did I say something wrong? Are they pulling away? Is something shifting between us? The mind moves from observation to interpretation to conclusion at a speed that feels, in the moment, absolutely rational. It feels like deduction. It feels like reading the evidence and reaching the logical conclusion. But this is where cognitive science becomes important. Research on emotional inference consistently shows that individuals with high emotional sensitivity tend to assign greater certainty to their interpretations than the evidence actually warrants. The signal was real. The interpretation was plausible, but the certainty with which it was held was disproportionate. Sign 3, the burden of anticipation. The hyper-aware person is frequently several steps ahead of the current moment. They have already imagined the conversation that hasn't happened. They have already played out the scenario that may or may not unfold. They have already felt the discomfort of the outcome they are trying to prevent. And because their pattern recognition is genuinely sophisticated, because they have spent years reading people and situations with accuracy, their predictions are not always wrong, which makes the system harder to dismantle. This forward orientation is deeply connected to anxiety, not anxiety as a character weakness, but anxiety as a cognitive style, a way of processing the world that prioritizes anticipation over presence, that treats the future as a problem to be solved rather than as an unknown to be met. Sign 4. Difficulty switching off sleep is one arena where this becomes painfully concrete. The hyper-aware mind does not simply stop when the body lies down, it continues. It replays conversations, extracting new meaning from remembered exchanges. It rehearses tomorrow's interactions, scripting responses to situations that may not arise. It evaluates decisions made hours or days ago, running alternative versions, searching for the one that would have produced a better outcome. This is not rumination in the pejorative sense. It is, in its own way, the mind continuing to do what it is built to do: processing, analyzing, preparing. The only problem is that this process does not distinguish between useful and useless, between solvable and unsolvable, between real threats and imagined ones. Sign 5, hyperempathy. The hyper-aware person doesn't just perceive the emotional states of others. They absorb them. They feel them. A friend's anxiety becomes their anxiety. A stranger's grief, glimpsed briefly in a public space, lands somewhere inside them and stays. While this creates a quality of compassion and attunement that is genuinely rare, that makes the hyper-aware person someone others instinctively trust and seek out in their hardest moments, it also means that every emotional environment leaves a residue. After a day of absorbing other people's emotional states, they do not feel refreshed by connection. They feel depleted because they were not merely present in those interactions, they were porous to them. Sign 6, control through understanding. Here is the logic that drives it. If I can understand everything, I can predict everything. If I can predict everything, nothing will surprise me. If nothing surprises me, I will be safe. Understanding, deep, thorough, exhaustive understanding, becomes the hyper-aware person's primary strategy for managing a world that can feel, at its most intense, almost unbearably unpredictable. This need for understanding is not arrogance, it is protection. But it carries a significant cost, which is that genuine openness, the kind of presence that allows for surprise, for uncertainty, for not knowing, becomes increasingly difficult to access. The mind that needs to understand everything before it can relax will rarely fully relax, because understanding is never truly complete. The hidden cost. Taken together, these signs point towards something that extends beyond personality into territory that psychologists increasingly recognize as a form of chronic cognitive and emotional overload. There is the mental exhaustion that accumulates across days and weeks, a tiredness that sleep alone does not resolve, because it is not the body that is depleted, but the mind. There is the emotional detachment that sometimes develops as a defensive measure, a numbing, a protective distancing from the world that the hyper-aware person simultaneously longs to engage with fully. There is the paralysis that sets in when faced with decisions, because a mind that can see too many possibilities, that assigns significance to too many variables, often cannot find the clarity to simply choose. And there is the persistent difficulty of being present, truly, completely, unreservedly present, in the moments that matter most. When awareness turns against you, there is also something that deserves its own name. It is the moment when awareness stops being a tool and becomes a trap. When the same intelligence that allows the hyper-aware person to navigate complex situations with remarkable sensitivity begins to turn inward and amplify. When it starts generating problems from neutral information, threats from innocuous signals, danger from stillness. This is what we might call misdirected intelligence. All the power of an extraordinarily capable analytical system applied to the wrong problems, running in loops that produce more anxiety rather than more clarity. This is the turning point that matters. Not because everything falls apart here, but because it is here that the choice becomes visible. Principle 1: awareness needs boundaries. Not everything that can be perceived deserves equal attention. The hyper-aware mind treats all incoming information as potentially significant. It applies the same analytical weight to a friend's momentary distraction as to a genuine sign of distress. Learning to triage, to consciously decide which signals warrant engagement and which can be acknowledged and released, is not a suppression of awareness. It is the development of wisdom about when to engage the depth of perception and when to let the moment breathe. Principle 2: not every signal requires meaning. Research on psychological flexibility consistently demonstrates that the ability to tolerate ambiguity, to sit with it knowing without immediately moving to fill the space, is one of the most significant predictors of emotional resilience. Not every silence signals withdrawal. Not every pause indicates reluctance. Not every change in tone carries a hidden message. Some things are simply what they appear to be. Principle 3: presence over prediction. The hyper-aware person lives, much of the time, in anticipated experience, in the conversation that hasn't happened, in the outcome that has already been modeled, in the emotional weight of futures that may never arrive. What presence asks is not that this person become incurious about the future, but that they develop a practice of returning, again and again, as many times as necessary, to the texture of what is actually happening right now, because the present moment, whatever it contains, is bearable in a way that the accumulated weight of all imagined futures is not. The present has only itself. Imagination has everything it can construct, which is limitless. Principle 4: emotional differentiation. The practice of emotional differentiation is the capacity to distinguish, in any given moment, what belongs to you and what belongs to someone else. This is not indifference. It is not the suppression of empathy. It is, in fact, a form of deep respect for both oneself and the other person, because it means showing up for someone's pain without dissolving into it, being genuinely present without losing the thread back to your own center. Your attunement to someone else's emotional state does not require you to carry it. You can acknowledge what you perceive and remain grounded in yourself. Principle 5: awareness as observation. The most subtle principle, and in some ways, the most transformative. The reorientation of awareness from judgment to observation. Judgment requires a verdict. Observation simply requires attention. You can notice that someone seems tense without deciding what it means about them or about you. You can register that a situation is unresolved without needing to immediately determine who is responsible. You can hold what you perceive lightly, as data, rather than heavily as proof. And it produces something remarkable in the hyper-aware person who begins to practice it: space. The experience of one's own awareness as a spacious thing rather than a dense one, as something that illuminates rather than overwhelms. When these principles begin to integrate, when awareness learns to select, when the mind becomes more comfortable with ambiguity, when emotional differentiation offers protection without requiring withdrawal, something begins to shift. What was a burden starts to reveal itself as what it always, at some level, was: a gift. Not an uncomplicated gift, not a gift without cost, but a genuine capacity that most people do not have and cannot cultivate simply by wanting to. The ability to read a room with precision, to understand what others are feeling before they have found words for it, to hold the complexity of human interaction without flinching from it, to see, really see. This is not a minor thing. This is one of the rarest forms of human intelligence. So here, at the close of this conversation, is what we want to leave with you. If you recognized yourself in what was described here, if you have spent years feeling simultaneously more attuned and more exhausted than the people around you seem to be, if you have been told that you think too much or feel too much, then please hear this. You are not broken. You are not flawed. You are not malfunctioning. The challenge was never to become less aware. The challenge is to become wise about your awareness, to govern it rather than be governed by it, to direct it toward what matters rather than toward what merely clamors for attention. That is the work. And it is, as it turns out, the most interesting kind.